some welcome remarks, which will be done by Mr. Darrell Montrop, the PS in the Departments of the Public Service, Gender Affairs, and Labor. Over to you, Mr. Montrop.
Thank you, Ms. Peter. Can you all hear me?
Sure, loud and clear.
All right. Greetings to all on the webinar. Where do I start? I'm going to be brief because I have a long day and several meetings. So I may not participate for the entire duration of the webinar, and I ask that you forgive me. And imagine that I'm starting this session by asking for forgiveness. So I trust that will show my own humility and willingness to accept correction and change. All right, that's first and foremost. But truly, given the topic up again, or responding to post-traumatic situation, at least post-traumatic, post-COVID, post-pandemic, since it's post-traumatic, you see, I get in some of my terms confused because in some ways, COVID has been, it's more than just the post-pandemic, COVID has been traumatic for several persons because it has exposed so many of the wrongs, so many of the problems that exist in the society, within organizations, within workplace, the civil service being no exception. But as they say with problems are what they say, opportunities in workflows, you know, and yet small opportunities can be the beginning of great enterprises. COVID not only has exposed the problems, I think it has also created some opportunities as it is forcing organizations, governments, people, and particularly organizations to have supportive conversations with their employees, okay? Or at least have more supportive conversations in the workplace. Because certainly one of the things that has happened in the service, as an example, and I'm assuming, well, it's certainly not only public servants on the call, am I right? Because it was open to the public. Am I correct? Like, you just nod your head?
Yes, you are, PS.
Yes. But at least most persons, they are either employees themselves or they are employers and they're part of the organization. And so certainly, as I said, COVID has exposed many of those challenges and forcing us to take a closer look at the kind of supportive environments that we have created for our employees, as persons have to adjust with homework, loss of even bosses in private organizations have had to deal with the stress of reduced income, reduced earnings, because they can't do all the things that they used to do. So the things that allowed some previous leaders, managers, bosses to feel all cocksure, cocky, self-assured, as in some ways, I'm not say rattle their foundation, but it has certainly shaken some of the, it has shaken some confidences and exposed the reason or the need for those greater conversations, as I said, or even the discussion for mental health. Now, we have all focused, at least for most persons and organizations, the focus was usually on physical health, or we all have accepted the need for great health. But that health have often focused on the physical aspect. Whereas we now know how important the mental side or the importance of mental wellness to the whole individual. And if an organization is to thrive, it must have healthy persons within it, okay? So it means that persons need to be physically healthy, but also mentally strong, mentally healthy. And EAPs, to the extent that this is organized by the EAP program. And those EAPs are now, I think they're becoming, because I can't say that all organizations or enough organizations in St. Lucia for sure have employee assistance programs. But certainly what it provides us with the opportunity to do is to converse, to dialogue, to see and understand the need for more convenient and accessible mental health support, and for the destigmatization of mental illness or mental health issues, because mental health is no different from any other physical ailment that we may have. So as managers, and if I am to wear that hat as a manager, leader of an organization, I know I want a healthy, happy, productive staff. Because if they are not that, certainly the organization couldn't function. Because the organization, just like any is, that's why much of the literature will often reference or use analogies of the human body to discuss the organizational health. So the mental well-being of the organization in terms of the spirit, how officers, how employees feel, is not going to, I don't want to say it's the mental, but certainly the feeling, the mental well-being is in its own way analogous to the mental health of that organization. And as I wish I could say as we're on the receding end of COVID, because COVID might very well be here with us, but certainly as we've gotten over some of the initial fear, panic, and getting some better measure perspective of COVID and as a pandemic, we are able to respond, or we have programs that will allow for sorry. See, now, these are some of the challenges, of the new, I don't say post-pandemic environment, but because of I want to merge the same post-pandemic environment situation of COVID has caused us to work in different spaces using the virtual platforms, yet in that very attempt to use and operate in different spheres will introduce new challenges and stresses. And so even those little inadvertent slip-ups create certain kinds of stresses, for employees. And it is these kinds of things I think we really need to understand, and the kind of environments that we, and I say we perhaps more so from the managerial, the leadership stance, need to understand and appreciate, and why we need as much mental health support. And I want to, at least certainly from the perspective of the government and or the public service ministry in particular, express the unreserved support for and confidence in such programs. So those of you who are on, I want to truly thank you and hope that we embrace the opportunities. That we need to think through, create, as I say, greater support for our employees in those kinds of support programs that we create. I want to thank you.
Thank you, PS. And of course, your excuse is accepted. For those of you who may not know, PS is new to the ministry, and he has literally hit the ground running. So he's been very busy. So you are excused, PS. We want to thank you for your kind remarks. These days, we can hardly talk about anything, especially stress-related, if we don't reference COVID-19. And this is our new reality, and perhaps will be around us for a very long time. So this is why sessions like this one are very important to help us cope as public officers and as citizens in general. You want to say something, PS?
Yes, because I did not even truly thank the presenter, Dr. Miller. I mean, I wanted to be able to, it's a little, maybe I'm Caribbean, maybe a little too touchy-feely, like to see, but I truly want to thank Dr. Miller. I think the main presenter truly, and trust that you will have a wonderful session. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, PS. Thank you, PS. We want to thank our partner, GIS. We like to let you know that we are also streaming on the Government of St. Lucia Facebook and YouTube page, so you could post your comment, your suggestion, what have you there, and also on the Zoom, in the Zoom chat room, you could post your questions there. They will be entertained at some point. At this point, we want to welcome Dr. Miller. Dr. Joselle Miller is a health psychologist and holds a PhD in health psychology from the University of Birmingham, UK. She holds a Master's of Science degree in applied psychology, specializing in health, a bachelor's degree with honors in psychology from the University of the West Indies Mona campus in Jamaica, and is a certified as a qualified assistant teacher with special training in secondary level education. Dr. Miller serves also as a wellness consultant and is the founder of the Value Experience, Value meaning the Latin word for wellness, and that promotes the holistic wellness of the individual, allowing the person to achieve their fullest potential through this avenue. Dr. Miller is the founder and president of the Scotch Cancer Support Foundation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. She is also the medical psychology professor at All Saints University College of Medicine, and the author of the book I Am, a Book of Affirmations. She's also co-author in academic journal on exploring the pressures of medical education from a mental health and wellness perspective, 2017. Also on Amazon listed bestseller for 2021 publication, Unstuck, Creating Your Bounce Effect. So we have a very well-rounded, very qualified individual before us. And trust me, what I've read is just a summary of her resume. So waiting before you is someone who, as I said, is very qualified. And no wonder Mrs. James selected her to be our lead this afternoon on this very important subject. She's from our neighboring island, just a stone throw away, St. Vincent, and we want to welcome her. And we want to thank the people of St. Vincent for loaning Dr. Miller to us this afternoon. Welcome, Dr. Miller. The floor is all yours.
Recording in progress.
Thank you so very much for that introduction. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes, we are, Dr. Miller.
Okay, so before I continue, let me share the screen. Okay, so let me say a pleasant good afternoon to each and everyone. It is my utmost honor, and I see it as a privilege to share with you this afternoon. As Madam Chair said, that we are a stone throw away, so I am happy to be counted as your sister. I want to, acknowledge P.S. Montrop and the EAP coordinator, Mrs. John Pierre James. I find it so amazing how things pan out. I think it was earlier this year that Mrs. James touched base with me about talking about this post-traumatic growth. And it has been something that has been on my heart for the last 5 years or so, that I've been trying my best to encourage persons to understand that we can all bounce back, that we can pick ourselves up amidst the adversities. Allow me to try and be a little bit St. Lucian right now. And I'm going to try to say this in patois. Bon midi? Is that right for good afternoon?
You're there. Great attempt. Bon après-midi.
Bon après-midi.
Right.
Yes. Well, I have been trying all day to say this in the right way, and I still got it wrong. I'm so sorry. And I was told that you say stack effect if you want to ask, how are you doing?
Yes, yes, we do.
So I got that one right.
Yes.
So I trust that everyone that you're doing well today, okay? And this topic of post-traumatic growth is one that is relatively new, somewhat as we speak in terms of psychological processing and letting persons understand that even though you have gone through something that is adverse, that there is still hope that you can emerge victorious on the other end. And I want to create a historical context first and foremost before we go any further. That research in post-traumatic growth estimates that around 3/4 of the global population would be exposed to one traumatic event at least one time throughout their lifetime. So when you think of the global population, 3/4 of that population would have an adverse experience at least one time in your lifetime that may affect you to the point that you may be, at risk of developing PTSD. Now, the vast majority of persons would recover naturally from an adverse effect. But then there are some persons who may, for different reasons, end up having struggles over the years to try and process what has happened to them. And the big question that a lot of persons tend to hold on to, why? Answering your why. Why me? Why did this happen to me? Why not someone else? And because we're trying to process that why, a lot of the times the negative aspects surrounding the why is what we tend to hold on to above and beyond anything else. So in the 1980s, in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for the American Psychiatric Association, it was then listed that PTSD should be considered as a disorder, following research that was done as it related to natural disasters and the survival of military veterans, and the fact that a lot of these persons were impacted for the rest of their lives. Today, trauma has been extended beyond just the understanding of natural disasters or military combat, but it is now looking in terms of all of the everyday things, a lot of the things that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things I want to interject right here, right now, if perchance during this session, anyone feels as if you have been emotionally triggered in any way, in a negative way, feel free to just simply exit, okay? Because what I would not want to happen is for you to be there and then it becomes too overwhelming for you, okay? And when you have exited, please feel free. If you want to send me an email message or something, you can also do that through Mrs. James, I'm sure, and I'll be willing to have a one-on-one with you and talk about whatever may be affecting you. So when we think of trauma now, we are thinking of probably surviving a vehicular accident, being a victim of a crime, witnessing a crime, betrayal, disappointment, loss of a loved one to death or divorce. When we think of miscarriages and infertility issues, we think of victimization on the job. We think of child abuse and sexual abuse. We think of, so many different things that can be traumatic to an individual. Much of what existed in the literature before pointed towards PTSD, which is the stress reaction and the negative impact. But now we have seen where post-traumatic growth has emerged, showing that persons can actually emerge in a positive and stronger way, having experienced something negative. And this evening, that is what we are going to look at. We are going to look at the tips that can help somebody to bounce back and to get up again. Understanding that there is purpose in your pain. That is one thing I always want to tell persons. There is purpose in your pain. And as this quote says, that which does not kill us make us stronger. This is something we say all the time here in St. Vincent. If it doesn't kill you, it will make you stronger. Bottom line, if you are in church, I would probably hear the pastor saying that it is through the pressing of the wine, of the grapes, that you have the wine, which means that we understand that even as you go through something difficult, that there is definitely some benefit in it. So what are we going to look at this afternoon? Understanding trauma. How do we respond to stress? Understanding and defining resilience. Defining post-traumatic growth, characteristics of post-traumatic growth. Bouncing back, moving from victim to survivor to thriver. And my own tips in terms of post-traumatic growth and the formula that I have come up with, that I have used for myself and I will want to share with you. So we all experience stress on a daily basis, the allostatic, every single thing that we have to deal with, the deadlines at work, the meetings, the traffic, juggling family. Now we know with COVID-19, because we have to do a lot of the virtual meetings and presentations, we understand now that you have to be juggling, keeping your child online with school, as well as maintaining your job, maintaining your focus on the job. You have to now be able to turn in a creative way some of the things that seem to be negative into something positive. Even positive things, even good things that happen to us in our lives sometimes can cause stress. Getting married, migrating, having a baby, all of these things are good, but it causes what we would label as eustress, meaning that although it's a good intent, it's a good reason, it's something worthy of celebration, it transforms our life. And that adjustment sometimes is what adds the stress, because now we are stepping into a realm that we were not accustomed to, okay? And one of the things I want to point out as we understand trauma, the 3 E's, that we are looking at the event, we are looking at the circumstances that is experienced by the individual that affects them physically and emotionally. And we are looking also at the effects that these experiences or this particular event would have had on the person. So when we think of the experience, what I want to point out is that each and every individual, we experience things differently. So I might be exposed to something. Let's say I witness a vehicular accident and I might look at it. I stand there, I observe what transpired. I feel somewhat bad, yes, but it wasn't traumatic for me because this is something probably that I would have experienced before, or I went through it myself and I overcame, so I'm in a better place. And then someone else would have experienced the same event and then they spiral totally out of control emotionally, that now they have been so triggered that it is causing a lot of responses mentally and physically in their bodies. There are different types of trauma. We have family trauma, refugee immigrant trauma, medical trauma, and poverty in itself is regarded as a very traumatic experience. And you will say, but persons experience poverty on different levels throughout their lives. Why is this so traumatic? If we are to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Maslow says that pretty much if we cannot respond to someone's basic needs in terms of food, shelter, security, those basic amenities, then we can't then speak to anyone about anything that is higher level. So we understand there is an importance to make sure that the resources are there, that the person will be able to adequately survive. Medical trauma, when we think of pain and injury, invasive medical procedures, we have COVID-19 that is changing or mutating every single day, and we have so many different reports about what to expect. And when persons are in a position where they no longer have the control, they no longer have the control in terms of what to expect, in terms of what happens next, that can be a very traumatic and daunting experience, because now persons basically feel as if you are on a fence, and literally you don't know if you're going to go forward or backward. And that ambivalence can actually take a toll mentally and emotionally on someone. There is something that we call complex trauma. And this is something that I want us to take note of, because it is quite significant how persons are affected. Complex trauma speaks of the exposure to multiple traumatic events from an early age. And it looks at the immediate and long-term effects of these experiences over the course of development. So when we think of children who are neglected, rejected, or abused, children who may have been sexually abused, experienced child abuse in terms of physical abuse on some level, have been bullied, all of these different things throughout their childhood at an early age, when they are still in those critical periods of brain development. These are the things that can allow for children to become fixated in a place where negatively now they are processing everything about their lives as being one of hopelessness, being unworthy, unlovable, and this translates into adult life. So when children grow up and there isn't a safety in terms of their attachment, when they get to an adult stage in terms now of creating lasting relationships and being functional, there is a lack of trust that still exists that will create problems going forward. So complex trauma can affect persons in terms of their everyday function, even as they embrace novelty, as they embrace new things happening to them, because of where they started and the coping mechanisms and the resources available at the start. If that was not strategically in place to help them learn, you're getting now to a place where as an adult, you will not be able to fully grasp and function under pressure. So how do we generally respond to stress? I don't know about you, but in St. Vincent, everybody seems to be stressed. And when you talk to persons, you hear all the time, boy, I'm just stressed out. I remember earlier this year, I was speaking to a 4-year-old, and get me right, I said 4-year-old. And I said, how are you doing? He said, I'm stressed. And I'm like, what do you know about stress? Why are you stressed? Because mommy was not doing X, Y, Z, okay? And he was able to express himself as to why he felt stressed out. And a lot of persons are under pressure. A lot of us, we are feeling stress, and our bodies, our minds are reacting to it. So it's important for us to understand how the brain functions under stress and how to identify those things that trigger us as we go about our daily lives. So I want to make this as simple as possible. There are two main areas of the brain that I want to focus on: the neocortex and the limbic system. Okay? And again, I know a lot of times when persons hear anything that is biological or anything, you start to come up that, okay, I can't understand this, so I'm going to break it down simply. I call the neocortex the thinking brain and the limbic system the emotional brain. So what the limbic system is concerned with is the part of the brain that is involved in behavioral and emotional responses. So when it comes to any threat coming in, and the neocortex or the thinking brain, when something happens, the thinking brain will process that information to now decide, is this something that is traumatic? How intense, how severe is this? And when the thinking aspect of the brain formulates that this is now a threat, the limbic system kicks in, okay? And this is basically what happens. The Omniglider senses threat and sets off an alarm. So picture somebody's trying to break into your house and you have an alarm system. As soon as they touch the door or they jar or try to pick the lock or something, the alarm goes off and it sends a signal that something is wrong. The thinking brain assesses the situation. There is a threat. How severe is this threat? Thirdly, what is going to happen now? The thinking brain goes offline, and the emotional aspect of the brain is activated to decide, is this a situation to fight or to take flight? The thinking brain helps to shut off the alarm and helps the individual to calm down. So after the emotional aspect comes in and the person either decides, I'm going to stand and fight, I'm going to take flight, then the thinking brain comes in and shuts it down. So the calmness comes back all over the individual. But when we think in terms of the stress response and trauma, when somebody experiences something traumatic, this is where now the thinking brain has processed a threat, but the threat is deemed to be overwhelming. It is overwhelming the system. So picture now that you are coming in and trying to turn off or recalibrate the alarm system to shut it off, but you can't get through to turn off the alarm. Okay? The emotional brain continues to signal alarm over and over again, sending messages. So even when the threat is gone, your emotional aspect is still wired and triggered, and it is sending out messages as if the threat is there, and you are constantly feeling this anxiety to either fight or to flee. So adrenaline rushes through the body. When persons are now experiencing a threat, you find that the heart rate increases, the pulse increases, all right? And you start feeling the physiological effect, where some persons have a churning in the stomach, some persons start sweating profusely, and all of these different things, when stress is directly affecting the individual. So every individual, based on your age, even gender, sometimes will have a difference in terms of the responses. So I want to give you an idea as to how different persons might respond. For young children, very young, be it 3, 4, 5, 6, up to probably 8, 7, if you want to look at that age, the fear, anxiety, and worry affects them in such a way that you might find changes in their sleeping habits and their eating. That most times children stop eating when they feel some sort of threat, when they feel scared or worried in any way, that they stop eating. Even when they give them their favorite foods, they might pick at it, but they're not eating a lot. Difficulty separating from caregivers. So what tends to happen now is that they become very clingy. Your little independent child that will go and play and do stuff on his or her own is now leaning onto you for everything. If you leave the room, they become very panicky and they start crying. You might see a regress behavior, losing speech, or the child might begin to wet their bed. Having been potty trained, now they start wetting their beds again. They may even be reenacting aspects of the traumatic event in their play. So when a child, for instance, if something uncomfortable has happened to the child, let's say somebody is touching the child inappropriately and they cannot verbalize, they do not know how to express what they're feeling, and that is something that is traumatic to them, that they're scared. In their playtime, you will see that they will be manifesting a lot of what has happened to them. So that's why we usually tell parents, pay attention to the play. Pay attention to what is being done when they're even around other kids their age. For the school-age child, we see feelings of guilt, shame, and self-blame. That whatever has happened to them, they think that they created it, it's their fault. Headaches, stomach aches, especially when the trauma is related to bullying, for instance. You find that every time the child has to go to school, the child is fine at home on the weekends. Monday, headache, stomach ache, don't want to go to school, not feeling well. They have nightmares, they have disrupted sleep. Sometimes they speak a lot in their sleep, and you might hear things like that they're screaming or stop, something like that. Difficulty concentrating, angry outbursts or aggression, because a lot of the times when children are unable to process their emotions, it comes out in an aggressive way. It comes out as anger when it could be fear. It comes out, in what might be termed from the Caribbean standpoint to be sometimes rude or disrespectful. But a lot of the times it's because they're unable to fully express what they're feeling. They may have some over or under reactions to situations. So if they have sudden movements, they might become scared. You see that they're jumping a lot. They might cry. They might become a bit withdrawn. For the adolescents, we see that they have a concern in terms of how others view them after the particular event. So let's say something has happened to them. Let's say molestation, rape, or something, a physical abusive situation. They are now more concerned in terms of how persons will look at them having lived through that particular scenario. The shame, the guilt, embarrassment, they start second guessing themselves in terms of, I allowed this to happen to me. You can see now that the traumatic event can also affect their moods. They decline in school performance, and for a lot of persons, you may see a rise in terms of risk-taking behaviors, alcohol and drug use, sexual behaviors, or even self-harm, which is self-mutilation, where some, teenagers might lean towards cutting themselves on their wrists, on their legs, and it is very important, again, for parents to pay attention. I would say, though, that culture affects our trauma response significantly. Where you grew up, and when we say culture, yes, we speak in terms of a national culture, yes, but in terms of communities and even family culture, because we all are exposed to different cultural or way of doing things in our different spaces. So how the person describes their experience will depend a lot on what is considered normative in that cultural space. How distress is expressed, if persons minimize it or if they exaggerate it, this all comes back from their socialization and how pretty much the overall populace may look at a particular thing. Which topics are acceptable to discuss? And we know a lot in the Caribbean that anything related to sex becomes a taboo. So sexual traumas of rape or molestation and all of these things are sometimes overlooked and not discussed because persons are uncomfortable talking about it. They are uncomfortable about the truth of what exists, okay? And how a person makes meaning of the experience will determine exactly how they would move on from the trauma, how well they're going to heal as time progresses. So when we speak of triggers, what are we talking about? Triggers are reminders of past traumatic experiences that automatically cause the body to react as if the traumatic event is happening again in that moment. Responses can appear confusing and out of place and be misunderstood by others. One of the things about triggers as it relates to trauma or post-trauma is that it can happen at any time. There is no predictive component to it that easily I've seen patients before or persons who experience a particular trauma and even going about their daily lives that something, maybe the sound of a horn or the smell of a cologne or something someone says can trigger that person to go back to that particular experience that they had. And then you see the break in terms of their emotions, that they begin to react almost as if the event is happening at that particular moment in time. So you hear the screams. You sometimes see persons just go into a ball and they go into the side of the room and they press themselves and hide themselves away from other persons and things like that. It could be very, very scary even for persons who are unaware that something has happened with that individual. So you're seeing it play out and you're wondering what's really going on. And it is just a matter that there has been a trigger that has caused them to go back to that initial experience. So common responses to trauma triggers include the fight responses, that people get aggressive. And when you're ready to fight, you start yelling, you start swearing, showing aggressive behavior. Your posture is now ready to fight. You become defensive, you stand firmly. When we think in terms of the flight response, people run away, you avoid, you use substances like alcohol, for instance, to try and numb. Persons might say that I'm going to smoke marijuana or something just to give me a cool head and to just calm me down and put me in a good space. The freeze response, where people space out. You appear to be numb and disconnected, confused and unresponsive. So even when persons are speaking to you, they say that, are you there? They keep asking, hello, hi, Julietta. People calling you and you're, yes, what? I missed it. Because in that moment, you just literally zoned out. So what happens generally when we think in terms of trauma? The potential first response for most persons is that we go into resilience mode, because we are wired in such a way to safeguard ourselves. If a threat comes in, our body, our mind starts telling us to think in terms of self-preservation. That's where it goes first and foremost. And the minority of persons who may not have the best coping skills and mechanisms in place may then succumb to the trauma, as opposed to be able to actually rise again and bounce back in that moment without help. So resilience is the flexibility in response to changing situational demands and the ability to bounce back from negative emotional experiences. And whilst I appreciate what happens when we are resilient, that we bounce back, there is that aspect of bouncing back that over the years I have shifted my persuasion, that I no longer subscribe totally to the concept of bouncing back, because what I realize is that we all strive to go back to what existed previously. And when that is not afforded us, then persons feel that all hope is gone. So when we think of bounce back, we understand that sometimes it involves recovery, resistance, and reconfiguration. All right. And I want to show you this photo that depicts what recovery looks like. So picture that you're having high winds, and we all know what it is to experience a volcanic, a hurricane, and the winds, they're just bustling and pushing and they're just simply coming very fast. And we see this coconut tree that is standing firm, and then you begin to bend. But the recovery would suggest that even as you bend, as the wind subsides, then what we normally see is that you go back to the place of standing strong. Sometimes in that recovery, you might discover that some of the limbs were broken and that it's gone. The resistance speaks of the root effect, that now a lot of the times the trauma goes and it hits at our core. So there are a lot of things that start breaking away, and the root in itself takes a shaking. In some events, what we might see is that the root itself pulls totally out. But we might find that even as the root, as you know it, if it is uprooted and the tree goes down, this is what happens when we think of post-traumatic growth, reconfiguration, that we see that out of what appeared to be something that's dead, that's finished, we see life emerging, and it's reconfigured, because now where the root was, that might have been uprooted and gone, it's dismantled, but there is still life existing in some parts of that tree that was just laying at the side. So you reconfigure and you have a rebirth where things are now, novel things are emerging, where in cases where persons we have felt that all hope is gone, you see now that necessity has become the mother of invention. that persons can understand that my pain can be turned into purpose. So we have the thriving aspect, and the thriving aspect speaks a lot about post-traumatic growth and recovery. Most times persons want to survive, and I hear that a lot. I just want to survive COVID-19. I just want to get from one day to the next. But it is really within us to push beyond the survival aspect and get to the thriving. Post-traumatic growth, therefore, it is through this process of struggling with adversity that changes may arise that propel the individual to a higher level of functioning than which existed prior to the event. So this is no longer about going back. This is now moving beyond what existed before and forming and creating something that is new, something that is now propelling the person to a new stage of enlightenment, a new stage of motivation and inspiration that you are pulling from the crux of within you to tell yourself that I have made it to the survival aspect. Now I'm going to push my way beyond the surviving to thrive. And when we begin to thrive, we are not just simply living for ourselves, but we are now in the position where we are taking others with us, because we are seeing that what I would have experienced, yes, I went through the pain, yes, I felt it, but it was not just about myself, but I share it now so that other persons can grow and excel and pull themselves up as well. And this is why I am extremely passionate about it, because the characteristics of post-traumatic growth, it speaks directly to you as an individual, no one else. It looks at you. So one of the things, we look at would be the perceived changes in yourself, the improved relationships, the change in life philosophies, the change priorities, the enhanced spiritual beliefs. Now, one of the things I always say, every interaction that you have in your life, it changes you. Something happens. Just picture walking down the street and you meet one of your friends or an acquaintance or a coworker or someone, and here you are smiling from ear to ear. Well, I know now we're wearing masks, but before we had all the masks on, and we are smiling from ear to ear to say, hey. And even as we do that, the person just walked past us. As much as we might say that, okay, fine, you do whatever and we walk along, that would have affected us. Things that come in through our senses, what we see, what we hear, things that we smell, that we taste, all of the things that comes in through our senses impacts us in some way and some form. Most times, a lot of things go unnoticed because it is just being stored in our subconscious. We are not consciously aware of it, but it is having an effect. And I always point out the fact that there is so much subliminal messaging that goes on throughout life. So even as you're walking down the street and you pass a shop or a restaurant or a vehicle is playing loud music and you're not paying attention keenly to the music, but you heard it, you kept going, you kept doing what you were doing, and then at night you're lying down to sleep, and sometimes this particular song comes back. You say, why am I hearing this song again? Why is this song in my mind? Because subconsciously it has been stored, okay? So I'm saying all this to say that trauma, every interaction, good or bad in our lives, affects us. But post-traumatic growth says that even as you have gone through COVID-19, as you have gone through the loss of your loved one, a family member, you have been told that you can't have kids, you have been divorced, you have lost your job, you have whatever the trauma or the difficulty is, a perceived change that we would want to see, knowing that post-traumatic growth is possible, is that you have become stronger. You are more confident. You have emerged as a better self and a more authentic person. You look deeper within yourself. You're more open to life and the possibilities. Because one of the things that COVID-19 has taught us is to appreciate life more. Appreciate the people in our lives, because in a split second, everything changes. So we are at a point where we have to social distance and we can't be around people. And even when somebody contracts COVID and you're on the COVID ward, your family can't visit you and stuff like that. So there's a different appreciation to life and even how you look at what you can offer. You become a bit more empathetic, a bit more humanitarian, all right, and a bit more humbled. Humbled by the experiences of life. When we think of relationships, relationships are, sometimes taken for granted until persons die. And then suddenly everybody realizes, oh my God, I wish I did. The woulda, coulda, shouldas. This is something that I always encourage persons. You know what? Spend time with family. Let family and friends know how you feel about them. Even when persons just come into your life for the first time, do not be in that position of judging something that you do not know. Give persons a chance. Get to know people for yourself, okay? Find out who your true friends are. And one of the things about adversity and traumas, they show you the crux of the heart of a man, because that's when you know exactly who is willing to be the ride or die. People say ride or die a lot, but not a lot of persons understand fully what it means. We have a change of life philosophy and increased existential awareness. Why am I here? That's the first question. If our lives have been saved, you have been sick, you have been down and out, and you have been given another chance at life, you have to ask now, what is the purpose of my life? Should I continue on the same pathway that I was on before? Or does it mean now that God has saved my life for a bigger purpose? Okay? Vulnerability and the shortness of time. We realize that sometimes we put up so many barriers that we are not able to extend ourselves to appreciate the perspective of others. All right? And time is something that is so precious and it slips away so easily. So even as we think of mortality, we have to think now, what happens when I die? That's a big question. And it lends itself now to persons going further and thinking in terms of what are their priorities in life? What do you prioritize? If we work every day, we're working hard day in, day out for that money. But do we ever get the chance to appreciate it and to use it in a way that can bring happiness to ourselves and others? Changing priorities in terms of learning new things. Before, a lot of persons were more concerned about making sure that they have a job that can pay them. Now, persons are more concerned probably about entrepreneurial enterprises, that persons realize that even as the economy is affected and I might lose my job where somebody is actually paying me to do something, I still have skill sets that I can use that can bring in an income. So you have to start thinking outside of the box. And your spiritual beliefs. Part of post-traumatic growth is getting persons to understand that there is something or someone that is greater and bigger than us. That it positions us in the perspective of understanding that we are dependent, that we are not doing this of our own. So increase spirituality, return to faith. Some people pray more. Some people attend church. Some people have a new sense of gratitude, a strengthening of faith, okay? And a lot of persons begin now to use their spiritual beliefs as a coping mechanism, trusting God through the process of life, knowing that I don't have the answers, but you have to trust that God is going to direct your steps accordingly. So how do we get back up? That's a big question. Moving from victim to survivor. We have to appreciate the trauma for what it is or what it was. When we say appreciate the trauma, that we no longer try to hide from it. We no longer try to pretend that this particular thing did not happen to us. It did happen. Yes, we are not going to be going through the blame game and holding our heads down in shame and saying that woe is me and throwing that pity party. But we are saying that, yes, I am a survivor of. I have experienced domestic violence. I have experienced betrayal at the highest level, whatever the case is. And this is why a lot of the times in support groups, persons are asked to identify themselves through their trauma. So they might say, for instance, if we think in terms of AA, Alcoholic Anonymous, I am Giselle Miller, and I'm an alcoholic. By identifying with what you are struggling with, you are now in a better position to start crafting a path out of that, okay? One of the biggest things that transforms a person from victimhood to survivor is forgiveness. Forgiving what has happened to you, forgiving the persons who have been, terrible towards you, who have done something to you. But you know what? Whilst we are able to forgive others, a lot of the times the person that we need to forgive the most is ourselves. We need to look at ourselves and forgive ourselves for whatever part we played in the trauma that we experienced, because sometimes through our choices, certain things have happened to us, but we are unable to let ourselves off the hook because, it's easier to carry that as, this space of vulnerability that says, oh, I'm not good, I'm not perfect. And we know that. But I seek to tell persons all the time to be excellent as opposed to seek perfection. So a victim will blame, and that is where the cycle of pain perpetuates and continues. A survivor will reflect and make peace with the present moment, and they are grateful for what they still have, and they're prepared now to enjoy life. So one way to understand the healing journey is to think of growing from a place of victimization to survival and ultimately get to become a thriver. While you may have had no choice about being a victim, guess what? You have a choice about being a survivor and about thriving in life. So regardless of what the traumatic event may be, where and when it occurred, you still have the responsibility to take ownership for your healing. You have to take ownership and responsibility to choose joy amidst the pain. Easier said than done, Dr. Miller. I keep hearing it all the time. But guess what? A journey of 1,000 miles, and this is one of the quotes that I subscribe to by Lao Tzu. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one simple step. All it takes is one day, one moment that you decide, I am going to do something different. I am going to change the dynamics. I'm going to change the game. And as we practice consistently to do that thing where I am being grateful, where I'm choosing joy over pain, and I'm choosing to forgive, I'm choosing to stand up and to have a voice. When you choose all of these things on a regular basis, it becomes normative. So we want to avoid the feelings of helplessness, fragility, self-pity, defeat, shame, and discouragement. We want now to replace a lot of that with affirmations that says the complete opposite of what you might be feeling. So we have to now let our thinking brain begin to process certain things differently, because if we abide by our feelings, that emotional side of the brain, then for a lot of persons, you will never move. So we have to start looking logically now at what exists and how we can, in a rational way, start making new choices and doing things differently. So the survival stage, this is where you are now in a position to create change in your life. You are now recognizing all of the possibilities of growth. So you're no longer looking backward, but you're looking towards opportunities. You are seeing things from a different lens. You are now appreciative that even though I may not be where I want to be, I am on a journey and I'm willing to go through the process to get there. So here comes recovery and growth. And as I said, this is where now, as a thriver, you begin to crystallize your growth process. One of the things that works very well to transform you from surviving to thriving is where now you turn your pain and you use it into something else. You have a renewed sense of purpose for life. And take, for instance, for myself, I always tell persons that I do not look like what I have endured. I do not look like what I have experienced. And it's because I drink my own Kool-Aid, literally, and I practice what I preach. So even as I go through difficult times, yes, I spend the moment and I cry, I feel the pain, but you know what? I'm committed to get back up. And even when my parents died, because I lost both my parents, and, you know, I shared this candidly in my book, Creating Your Bounce Back Effect. When my parents died of cancer, I realized right away that there were certain deficiencies within my country as it related to support systems for persons enduring cancer as patients and their families. And that is where the Schoolaged Cancer Support Foundation was birthed. And this is where you actually start thriving in your life when you turn what would have been the disadvantage, when you turn the pain and the suffering and you turn it into something that can now be a catalyst for change, not only for yourself, but for others. So I want to just provide you with what I consider to be the post-traumatic recovery formula. And again, these are tips that I use for myself, and I outlined it very well in my book. So I would want to put a plug there for anyone who is interested. You can find it on Amazon. It is called Unstuck, Creating Your Bounce Back Effect. Okay. And these tips, they are tried, proven, and they do work. Okay. Everything needed to bounce back from trauma already exists within you. It's there. It's inside. It's just a matter that you have to dig a bit deeper to see it and to realize it. And I use the trifactor approach because I'm a Christian and I'm a psychologist and I'm a coach. I put all three together. And one of the things I spoke about in the book as well, I use the reference of the children of Israel getting to the Red Sea. And here we are at the Red Sea, pretty much they say, well, okay, this is done. What are we going to do here now? And what did the scriptures say? That the Lord spoke to Moses to use what was in his hand. And he stretched forth the rod and the sea parted. Okay? And I want to use that analogy to suggest that even now that God is saying, what is in your hand? What gifting have I already placed on the inside of you? There's a scripture that says that your gifting will make room for you. When you figure out your purpose in life, it is going to open doors. It is going to transform. It is going to take you into new places. Your territory will become enlarged. Number two, the unique situations you experience create compelling redemptive stories, not for you, but to be a catalyst of change in the lives of others. You are not alone. Even in the darkest point of the night, understand that God is with you. Acknowledge your feelings instead of burying them. So, I am feeling sad, I'm feeling hurt, whatever you're feeling, acknowledge it. Cry if you must. Slow down. Stop in your tracks. Be resolute, however, not to remain in that place, but to keep moving and to be committed to taking a step every day. Adopt a positive mindset and begin to cultivate a spirit of gratitude. This is guaranteed to change your whole perspective on life. If we sit every day and count all of the blessings we have no time to consider what's going wrong. If we sit and we begin each day, start writing a gratitude journal. And in that journal, what I want you to do every day, put 1 or 2 things that you're thankful for and do not repeat anything. You would realize that you have so many things that can be placed in that book. And before you know it, your perspective is different, because whilst you would have, spent the time before saying, oh my God, I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have the other. Yes, I do not have those, but these are the things I still have. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Neither is accepting help when it is offered. Sometimes pride can get in the way. We are afraid to be vulnerable because, yes, trust is a major issue. So persons will say, boy, I don't know who I can talk to. I don't know. If you don't feel you have a support system in terms of your friends and family, go to a professional who can be objective and listen. Let them, as you speak, listen to the guidance that will be offered to you and utilize it. Begin to affirm yourself daily. Remember, each day you are stronger and better than the day before. Learn from the mistakes made. Go forward wiser and smarter. Seasons change. We know this. And one of the things I have adopted in my life is the spirit of goodbye. There are times you have to say goodbye. And when I say goodbye, goodbye to the negative things. Goodbye to the person who always keeps you down. Goodbye to the discouragement. Goodbye to all of the things around you that are not part of the journey of growth that you are now on. Make yourself a priority. And this does not mean that you are selfish. Self-love and self-care is a must. You can never pour from an empty cup. You have to be willing to take the time to refuel, rejuvenate regularly, which means stepping back. And I know mothers a lot. Mothers always feel that you have to carry everything. You are the chief cook and bottle washer, as we might say. So we have the responsibility of the children, the home, the job, everything that you're juggling. But sometimes you have to say, you know what, mommy needs half an hour, nobody speaks to me. In this half an hour, mommy is just going to relax, put her feet up, and she's going to have a good time by herself. And that's okay. Set boundaries. This does not mean that you're a bad person. And always remember, no is a complete sentence. No explanation needed. I think too often we try to explain why no. And before you know it, because you're trying to explain, you end up giving in and say, okay, I'm going to do it, when you know that you are too stretched and you can't really do it and do it well. Make a plan. This will help you move forward. It is easy to return to that familiar space, but you have to fight against it, because familiarity brings that comfort, yes. But sometimes you have to push past what is familiar, because this is where new ground can be unearthed and open up, where persons can now walk into the purpose that you have truly been created. Remember, the pain that does not transform will be transmitted. If you don't transform your pain, you're going to transmit it. And one of the things I remember, as part of my job as a psychologist, sometimes I go onto the maternity ward, and if there is a mother, especially young mothers who may not have the support system, when they are going through their labor process, I go and I hold their hands, and I be there with them as a point of comfort. And I remember one time the midwife is saying, use your contraction. So when you feel the contraction, use it and push down. And the young lady was using the contraction, but she was not pushing down. She was there clenching. And she got a spank and she said, no, use your pain, use the pain. Because sometimes it's when the pain is hardest, when you have to push. And when you push, that is when something new is going to be birthed. And remember, as I said earlier, reconfiguration. break free, and understand that your new life awaits you. It is all for you to understand fully that post-traumatic growth is about transforming through trauma, understanding that in your pain, there is purpose. And what I always tell persons, let it be that it makes you better, not bitter. Thank you so much for listening, and I will take any questions that you may have.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Miller. I know that the vote of thanks has been designated to someone else, but for my part, I would really like to say thank you profoundly for taking time to share this very important information with us today. What stood out for me, I really like the fact that you touched on some of the events and the experiences that cause stress, but sometimes these are considered too taboo, and so people don't talk about them. Also the stress triggers that you mentioned, and also for me, something that's often neglected or scoffed at or not seen as very important is the spiritual connection. And you ended with a very, very, I would say nice, for lack of a better word, quotation, the pain that is not transformed is translated. I really love that. So participants, I think if you've forgotten most of what Dr. Miller has said this afternoon, remember that beautiful quote. Now, before I open the floor for questions, Dr. Miller said a lot in a short space of time. So I suspect at the end of the webinar, because of some of the stresses in life, you might forget some of the things that she spoke about today. And this is why books are there to help us when our memories fail. And so I'm encouraging you to get a copy of Dr. Miller's book. It is called the copy of Unstuck, and this is available on Amazon. So get a copy. You can get in touch with the acting manager of the EAP unit, Mrs. James, and so she can assist you in that regard. At this time, I want to open the floor for questions. I think we have this one posted by me. You often hear that stress can be positive, and so I wanted Dr. Miller briefly to touch on that. How can stress be considered positive?
Okay, so stress in itself, pretty much it is something that propels us. And when we use it in a positive way, in terms of that enough stress that pushes you to be on your P's and Q's, if you want to call it that it makes you want to push to learn, it makes you want to push to grow. But when it becomes negative, it's when all of your coping mechanism that you have surrounding you, it is now not enough for you to actually push through all that is coming down on you, if that is making sense. So it is about perspective. It's about understanding that every single thing that happens in our lives can either go one of two ways. It can go negatively, it can go positively. And it's a matter now that you have to be self-aware to know whenever there are certain things going on in your life that you are not handling. And I think part of the reason why stress affects us so significantly is that we are not taking the time to be aware of where we are at. Being aware in terms of your emotional space, because even if I ask some persons, do you know when you're getting upset? And people be like, do you know, there are different things that start happening in your body. And if you're aware of it, then you'll be able to step back. When you start having the constant headaches, and you say, I didn't drink enough water. Or in the Caribbean, everything is gas. I have gas. when we have the tension pain, and we start rationalizing, maybe I slept bad. And all of these things, we have to now realize that sometimes our body is giving us signals that we are probably under too much pressure, meaning that there are certain things on our plates that we need to get rid of and prioritize.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Miller. There's some positive comments in the chat with regard to the presentation.
Recording stopped.
One person said it's a great presentation. This was a timely message. Thank you. Excellent presentation, encouraging, uplifting. thanks for touching on the spiritual. And one person is interested in knowing whether the presentation will be emailed or sent to participants. So I guess that will be a question for Mrs. James. Mrs. James, will the presentation can be
emailed to the participants?
Sure. I guess they would have to, in that case, I guess they would have to contact you, the EAP.
Yes, I will provide that information in a few minutes.
Sure. So is that all from our participants?
We have a few comments from Facebook. Julita, permit me to share. Someone is saying helping others is very healing for me. Another person said that the session was very interesting. Another person is saying great session. Thank you, Dr. Miller, for sharing the information with us. An excellent session, and this is what we've been getting. So, of course, we can say that it has been beneficial to the listeners.
Okay, I can see. So can I take it that we could start wrapping up, Mrs. James?
Sure, we can. I need me to, of course, do the vote of thanks.
Sure, you may go ahead. So our vote of thanks will be done right now by Mrs. Sasha James, who is the acting manager of the Employee Assistance Program. You may go ahead, Mrs. James.
Thank you so much, Julita, for such a wonderful job. Good day to everyone who's logged in via Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and NTN. Thank you for making the effort to join us today. And I do believe that we can all agree, based on your comments, that this has been a very fruitful webinar. We often hear that mental health is a health, and without mental health, there is no health. If you never believe this to be true, I dare say that your perspective after listening to this webinar, and even since COVID-19, that has changed. We are aware that this pandemic, coupled with all of the challenging situations that you and I have been through, have impacted us in so many different ways. And I'd like to thank, first of all, the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Darrell Montrop, for offering the opening remarks today. Dr. Joseph Miller, our facilitator, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience. As I have indicated, and as our moderator have shared, the comments speak to the quality of the information. And I'm really thankful for making yourself available to share that information with us. For me, I understand that there is indeed growth after trauma. You highlighted that. Positive change can occur after trauma. And for our listeners, those who listen afterwards, as the webinar will be made available on YouTube, we know that you will get some valuable information from this webinar, and you will learn how to bounce back from your trauma. Julita, you shared one of my takeaways, but I will still highlight it. Remember the pain the pain you do not transform, you will transmit. Somehow that has really stayed with me. Special thanks to Ms. Davina Lee and her team at the NTN for providing us with live coverage of the webinar. To our very esteemed moderator, among other roles, Ms. Julita Peter, thank you for such a wonderful job. Thank you to Mr. Randy Joseph, staff of the training department, for assisting us with our video recordings. And Mr. Damian James for creating the webinar flyer that so many of you shared. And the last, by no means least, thank you to the wonderful team at the EAP for your continued service and support. And the Employee Assistance Program, the EAP, is committed to increase awareness on mental health matters. And it is really our desire that St. Lucia will be a mentally healthy society. And again, thank you all for logging in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for posting your comments. And to get in touch with the EAP, we can be contacted at 468-2269 or 468-2260 or 285-5262. Again, thank you all. 285-6252. Thank you all for listening.
Sorry, Mrs. James. Just before you end, you mind giving the email address as well?
And we can also be contacted at eapunit@gobt.lc. So let's move from victim to survivor. Do have a pleasant afternoon, everyone.
May I quickly just shout out my Vincentian friends who joined the webinar as well, Arthur Lawrence and Dr. Bonady. I just saw their comments. Thank you so much.
Oh, we had our the Vincentian neighbors. Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Also there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.